Hey everyone, Andre here. Before I start the video, I just wanted to say two things. One, if you are more used to TikTok style videos and you don't want to sit through a 6-minute video, I have a short that's also called Airbrushes Part 1 short that in 20 seconds will demonstrate what I'm going to talk about in this video, the technique. And two, if you know somebody who airbrushes and who struggles with it or who might benefit from this video, share with them and give me a follow for more airbrush tips. Thank you. Hey everyone. So I want to share with you number one tip and the most important tip that changed how I use an airbrush and changed my relationship with an airbrush completely. It went from I went from clogging them constantly and cleaning them to just using them to apply color and then put it back on the shelf without taking it apart, stripping them, anything like that. So what I learned from an airbrush artist, I learned the proper way to use a dual action airbrush. If you're listening to this series, the chances are you know what a dual action brush is, but just for completion, let's talk about it. Dual action means you have a trigger that can be pushed back and it can also be pushed down. And the way the airbrush works is when you push down on the trigger, the air comes out. When you pull back, the paint starts flowing, right? If you just pull back, nothing happens, the needle goes back, but no paint comes out because there's no air, right? So you push down, air comes out, you pull back, paint's flowing with the air, and then you this shuts off the paint, shuts off the air. So this is the wrong way to use an airbrush, and this is how I learned from YouTube videos, and this is what I see a lot of miniature painters do, and that's how they teach you to airbrush. I see a lot of miniature painters do this. And what this does is you're thinly and slowly applying paint, which is correct application-wise, but it's not correct usage of the airbrush. You never want to do this. The correct way to use an airbrush is you push down, air comes out, you pull back, paint comes out, you push forward, paint stops, and only then you release the trigger to stop the air. So what this means practically is that you never want to stop the air as the paint is flowing, right? So you never want to exaggerate this, you never want to push down, pull back, and then release it. That's what causes clogs. That's what causes the reason that you cannot clean it just by blowing water or cleaning solution through it. You have to strip it because there's dried paint. So so if you've made it this far, this is all you need to take away from this video. When you paint, you never want to release the trigger as it's pulled back, right? So you can still do thin applications, but what you need to do is you push down, the air comes out, and then you just rock the trigger back, but you do not let the air stop. You can stop watching the video now, but let's talk about why this is why it's important. So this is our needle. This is our needle inside an airbrush. As we push the trigger back, push the trigger down, air is going. When we pull back, paint starts flowing over the needle and out, right? So it's constantly moving. The needle is covered in paint, but it's constantly flowing and moving. So it's not drying at this moment. This will not dry because the air pushes the paint away before it has a chance to dry, right? If you release it as the paint is going, then the paint immediately stops where it is at that time. So you have an entire needle covered in paint, right? And it's so thin, and we know how fast acrylic paint dries, it just basically dries immediately and there's a tiny layer of paint on it. You do it a couple of times and you basically have a clog at the end of the needle that's pushed into the nozzle. right? So what happens if you do it correctly? You push the trigger down, the air is flowing, you pull it back, the paint is flowing over the needle, you close the paint, the air is still going, so whatever that was left of the paint on the needle is now pushed away and the needle is completely paint free. Now you can remove the trigger and the needle is completely clean and free of the paint because you pushed it away. Does that make sense? I might not be as eloquent explaining it, but I hope you understand why it's important. If you understand why it's important, you will know that you never want to release the trigger as the paint is flowing over the needle, because everything shuts off instantly and the paint is on the needle, and that's what causes clogs. It's the number one reason your airbrush clogs, is you're not using it correctly. It did take me a couple of months to relearn that muscle memory. I would constantly be doing this because I've been doing it for years, right? But I would catch myself and I learned. Now, basically, it's such muscle memory. This, as soon as I start applying paint, the trigger is always down. I always have air flowing. It never stops, right? And then I can gently apply color just by rocking the trigger back and forth. But the air is constantly moving. I'm not releasing it. Only when I'm done and I know that the trigger is all the way forward, then I release. I hope that makes sense. And this was there's a couple of other tips that I can share, but this is the number one thing that completely changed the airbrushing for me. I shoot very thick primers through this airbrush. I don't thin them. I almost never thin paints if I'm doing base coating. I will thin paints with the medium if I want to glaze. But with thin regular airbrush ready paints, your airbrush should never clog. You're just, it's so thin at that point. So the most important thing, down, back, forward, up. I hope it helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'm excited to share some more videos with you over the next couple of weeks.